right? So just everyone is aware, we are recording this webinar so that we can use this for posting on the PA Adult Ed Resources website in the eData section. So welcome to what is almost now the end of the 24-25 program year. Seeing lots of friendly, familiar faces in the room here today. So welcome back and good to see all of you again. I am, of course, Michael McCarty with the MIS project, and joining us this morning, well, afternoon now, is Steve Linus. And we're going to talk all about two main topics today, which is the version 3 of the Access template, since that's just about ready for release. And we're going to talk about the end of the program year in eData. So if you've done this before, if you've ridden this ride before, and you're familiar with ending the program year in eData, it is likely going to be familiar to you. There's not a lot of extra changes or things this year, but it still happens only once a year. So it's good to review and be aware of some of those specifics as they occur. So let's dive right in. We actually have sort of a three-pronged approach today, and the first is for us to really throw at you a lot of information. And after that, we'll take questions. But if you have questions as we go along, feel free to put them in the chat. Then we're going to stop for a Q&A after the presentation. And then after that, we're going to have what I would say optional section for those of you who are template users to stay and have us demonstrate some of the features in version 3 of the template and also potentially ask some template specific questions. So we're going to dive into the presentation first, which takes us to this first slide where we will talk about the template itself. So version 3, thanks for all of your patience in allowing us the time to get it ready. It's almost done, should be released later this week. And we'd like to start today. We're excited to talk about some updates that Steve has been hard at work on in the past few months since version 2. Updates that hopefully are helpful to you. Fixing some bugs are certainly helpful, but also some new queries and existing queries in new locations. So one thing that you'll notice right off the bat when you fire up version 3 is there's no longer a miscellaneous page. It's been replaced by what we're calling the monitoring page. Much of the content that was previously on the miscellaneous page is now on the monitoring page. And it's been added to a lot of things that count adults, count assessments, do other counts, we call them, by agency. So its focus has shifted more to a statewide monitoring page because of those counts. And someone like us who runs statewide data, you can see a breakdown by agency of how many of whatever topic it is. So you as agencies are certainly more than welcome to take a look at that page, see what's on it. Again, lots of things were previously on the miscellaneous page are now on that monitoring page. But it's also something that's designed for use by the advisors, for example, who monitor agencies statewide. And so it has some tools on there specific to the advisors. But you are more than welcome to run that anytime you'd like. On the class group report page, there are 2 assessment queries that are already on the assessments page that have been updated and added. Those queries allow you to filter by class, much like you've been able to do with the other existing queries on the class group page. And so the most recent assessment date query, for example, lets you run and find the most recent assessment date for the adults in a given class or group of classes by keyword. And so we put that there in the hopes that that would aid and help you in working through your data when looking for post-test information, for example. There's several slides of updates here. Steve's been very busy. So the next one is we added a shared adult column to the performance reports, and that may be useful for you to monitor a count of how many adults are shared between your agency and another. Also, some items were by request. So many of you have some great ideas. some of you are on a data team that we meet with, and others provide ideas for, hey, it would be nice if we had this here, this there. So one item that falls within that category is the adult keyword field. And that has been added to several assessment queries on the data checking page. Again, in the hopes that if you find those data checks related to assessments and you use keywords that say are by site, you could disseminate that information to each site separately using that keyword field as a filter. And lastly, on this screen here, we have fixed a bug in the enrollment summary reports. So if you were having any issues on the hours page running enrollment summary reports, version 3 should fix that issue for you. In an effort to streamline the data checks, we removed, for those of you who have family literacy, there's no longer home visits category on the data check, and it's also been removed from the family literacy page. We talked to the division and they okayed the removal for that because that was something that was triggering for a lot of you. And since it's not an activity that's common anymore, we went ahead and just removed it completely. We added a reason for leaving field to queries on the assessment page. Another request so that you could track again for post-testing perhaps who's left the program and the reason they left. Informs who and when you might follow up with someone. And based on all of your feedback, so thank you to those of you who responded to our survey a couple months ago. Based on your feedback from that survey, we picked the top 10 vote-getting demographic fields to add to various queries on the NRS, hours, and assessment pages. And we had asked you which of those pages was a priority. Well, it turns out that was useful for us to know, but Steve found time to include everything on all the pages. So we didn't need to prioritize. Steve, thank you for getting that in there. So you'll find demographic fields on the queries now, should you want to filter and or sort by certain categories. So you'll see those in select queries on those pages. Steve added to the family literacy performance reports several items that take the place of a couple of the lesser used children tests, child assessments. So pre-post percentage, ed gain percentage, ed gain and no gain with post are some new categories that those of you who run performance reports and have family literacy that you'll see on those reports. Also added a detail button to adults without a post-test and eligible for post-testing query. So if you look on the assessments page, you'll see a button that says details, but it's colored a little differently than the other details buttons. And that's because when you run that query, it is actually running a form that lets you sort and run essentially run a query from within the query that lets you see, if I have a count of 10, who those 10 folks are. That's one that's best shown as a demonstration rather than described. So we'll show you that, get you a sense of how that works. It's a new way of presenting data in the template, just organized a little differently. Data's the same, but how it's organized different. So thank you, Marcella, for that idea on that one. And lastly, on this slide, we added a rollover assessment eligibility query to the assessments page. We'll get into that one also during our demonstration, but in summary, because I'll mention this again later in another slide, but in summary, what this query does is it takes the max assessment date query, uses the first date for the next program year. So in the case of where we are now, that would be July 1st, 2025, and says how many people as of July 1st, 2025 will have a rollover eligible assessment in eData. And then it further goes on to say, as of each individual adult, because each adult appears once on this query, what is the expiration date for the rollover assessment that they will have? So if they are starting in August and their assessment expires in July, you'll see that on this report. So you can use that to hopefully help determine who in this summer needs a test to be eligible for enrollment for 25-26. There were a total of about 21,000, because there's 21,000 adult records in the system, 21,000 adult records that are considered to have a post-test or a pre-test somewhere in the 24-25 program year. And of those, we got that down to around 8,000 statewide with this query. So that's still a lot of information, but we cut it by over half. And that's because we eliminated anybody that won't have a rollover. So if they're not on this query, the idea is that they are not going to have a rollover. So some of this is a case of if you check that list and their name's not on it, they won't have a rollover available to roll over in eData once the system opens. So we'll talk about that more during the demonstration later, but we hope that that is a useful query for you in evaluating who you might need to give an assessment to this summer. Lastly, for the report, the version 3 updates, if you run performance reports, remember to back them up, which is the top button on the performance reports page, and then restore them in version 3. And we also always recommend, it's totally fine to keep your version 3 file, just in case, because that serves as a backup for your performance reports themselves. Especially this time of year, you may have been running those reports for months, so you want to make sure that they're backed up, that you have access to them. So keep that version 2 file and then back up in that version 2 file, then restore them in version 3. And it's a great spot to mention that, of course, any of these items that you might have further questions, you might want follow-up, a how-to, a quick check-in via Zoom, whatever is best for you, let us know, and we can certainly walk you through the steps here. On to some timeline. So now we get into the end of program year considerations, and it's hard to believe that we're already talking about it, but here we are. So some things to put on your radar for eData related items. So this is going to touch on a lot of things, not just the template. July 1st on the PAIR website, in the eData section under Agency Data Entry Forms, the 25-26 eData forms will be available. So even though you might be doing intakes for folks right now that you're planning to serve into July and August, you should still be, for those adults that you're taking intake information for, still be collecting that intake and putting that intake into eData as you've had contact with the individual now. Those are reportable students for this program year. That will also be setting the foundation for being able to roll over their information into the program next year. So something to keep in mind, and that's why we don't make the 25-26 forms available until July 1, because the 24-25 forms are still valid now. Something also to consider from July 1st to 15th is that final opportunity for data entry. You'll only be entering data, of course, through the end of June, through June 30th, but the extra 2 weeks is because of that allowable time that is in the policy that says you have 2 weeks to get all your data in. So you've got July 1st to the 15th to add everything in that occurred through June 30th. And then at close of business on July 15th, eData will close and will not be available. You won't be able to log in at all. So that's when your downtime starts. We're going to go kind of through some details, some things to think about. Again, this is all over the map, but it's all eData related. So we just talked about the end of your data entry for those last couple weeks, or the first 2 weeks in July, ending July 15th. Forms for the new program year. There are only a handful of updates going into next year. What you'll see are forms that contain only information for the valid assessments. So some assessments are being sunsetted coming up here on June 30th. There will be no forms for those assessments because they will not be available in eData for either entry or rollover. On June 27th and July 7th, Steve is going to send you all, mostly you as administrators, the data check summary reports via email. These are the reports you typically get the first business Monday of every month. But this time of year, we like to send you a little bit of extra. So we're going to send the July report early, essentially on June 27th. And we're going to send an extra report a week before the system closes on July 7th. so that you're getting a little more frequent check-in from us about those data check summary reports. You can always run those locally, of course, monitor the changes that you're making, but just know that those are going to be some extra reports that you're going to get from us. And that's an opportunity for you to turn around and ask us questions about what is on those reports if, as we approach the end of the year, you have any concerns, questions, comments, that sort of thing. Another very important process as we get to the end of the program year is the data validation process. That is in Division Policy C130. And that has instructions within it on how to complete the process. And the last page is the form that you submit to the division. One quick note there is part of the process is running reports on the data validation form. It specifies certain reports to check for the data. It's important to note that those should be done on the data validation page, because the data validation page in the Access template takes the extra step of reporting on each adult where they had the most hours, with 054 being the primary place that we would place adults first if they have family literacy hours. In other words, if you run all the different table fours and you have several different grants, you would get an unduplicated sum total of adults across those reports, because each adult's only placed in one report based on where they had the most hours. So that was a lot to kind of throw out right there. If you have any questions on that data validation, let us know. But the most important thing we wanted to pass along is that that process is in the C-130 policy, which is available on the Pennsylvania Department of Ed website under the Administrative Documents section in Adult Ed. And the process is there. If you have any questions about how to run those reports, just let us know. Every year we give you all a to-do list, some things to think about. I know many of you run your own local databases to track data, so you probably have other things that you do to navigate this time of year. But as far as eData is concerned specifically, we have some things that we have been recommending for a few years now. Of course, in eData itself, you should be adding all completed 24-25 adult intakes to eData. Those intakes represent adults who have expressed interest in engaging in adult ed with your agency. And as a result, they're considered, per the NRS reporting standards, they're considered reportable adults. So even if you didn't serve them, you just have a completed intake, that's still something notable and something that should be entered into eData. For all of you that are data quality specialists and working more directly with the data, we want you to try to contact us to resolve all near matches and all deletion requests as soon as possible at this point, just in case it takes us some time to resolve either of those issues. If you let us know as soon as possible, we can try to get those resolved. Of course, needing to get those all finished by no later than July 15th. As far as the data is concerned, you've all done a tremendous amount of work this year with the adults that you work with. That work has added up to a ton of data that you've taken the time to put into eData, and again, sometimes also your database. So in the interest of being able to use that and benefit from all of that work that you've done, we recommend two backups. And the first is to save a copy of the exported data that you have. So that's that extract report.zip file that you export from eData anytime you want to update the template. We recommend that you update that, download the most up-to-date copy that you can as soon as you're done with your data entry, and then rename it. We encourage you to rename it something like you see on screen, 24-25 full year data. You can rename that zip file, no problem. And we always recommend that you put that in a subfolder in your data folder as a means of organization. Now, it's up to you ultimately where you put that, but a local drive is usually the most secure as opposed to cloud storage, for example. And again, this is just a way to update. Then if we go to the next slide, we present sort of part two of that two-part update, where you take the template that you've updated for 24-25 in this case, Version 3 is recommended since that's the most recent, has the bug fixes and so on. And also save a populated template file in a subfolder in your data folder. And we suggest that because we know you all have data folders if you're using the template, and it's a consistent place to put something that is perhaps easier to remember down the road where you put it. So just to summarize again, those backups would be the zip file coming out as your export. You can rename it if you'd like, just to make sure you know what it is, and it's the final export of the year. And then from that export file, when you populate your version 3 of the template, back that up as well. And with those two items, especially with the populated template, you'll be able to run reports, data validation, monitoring for assessments in July and August, even into September for some of you, when eData is not available. And so even though that wouldn't be current year data, a lot of students that you have continue or return, so you can still monitor and do some of the items that you need to over the summer with that template file. And the zip file is just a backup. So if something goes wrong, you have that, you can download a new version 3 and you've got the raw data. So both can be very important backups. And just another note here that on July 15th, eData will close at close of business, and everyone's going to be locked out after that. Some more sort of do's and don'ts here for end of year. One reminder, don't exit all of your adults in eData. Remember that in adult ed now, we evaluate the student's participation in those periods of participation, which can cross program years. So if you are still serving an adult and they have not yet been absent from your program for more than 90 days, don't add exit dates for those adults. As many of you know, the core outcomes, students are put into those cohorts based on if they have an exit date. Have no fear. If you don't put an exit date in eData and you miss somebody, the statistician will check to see what their most recent date of attendance was, assign them an exit date if appropriate, and put them in the cohort. So putting all exit dates is not required to get all of your students in those cohorts. Only exit those adults where the exit date's appropriate. A couple updates here for some specific fields, staff years of experience, check and update that. Check and correct counties, review data checks. So these are just items, things that you probably would be doing throughout the program year, but now that we're getting close to final data, you want to double check some things and make sure that they're set. And with those data checks that we noted that you'll get from us and that you can run locally, remember there's two things really involved in resolving data checks, two possible options. The first would be is if you find an error, something missing, something that is just wrong number should be 58 instead of 55, that kind of thing. Make those changes, of course, correct those errors, and that will likely resolve the data check. But some data checks are not necessarily an error. They are maybe out of the norm, say remote hours in an in-person class, that sort of thing. But if those remote hours were a result of documenting instruction or assessment time that were administered remotely, and the person's only in an in-person class, that's okay to have those remote hours in that in-person class. It's the only place you can put them. So that's just a random example out of many where you might find what the data check is saying, here's an issue, but it's not an error. And so you can document those, keep track of those, and if it becomes something that is a larger pattern, that may become an opportunity to evaluate a process outside of eData that's leading to those data checks. That's not a data entry error, but something else. And there's a lot of gray area there. So if you see some things that you have questions on your data check summary reports, just let us know and we can review those, confirm what we're seeing, talk with you about your specific situation and help you work through those. So don't feel like on any of these things that you're on an island, that you have to do all this on your own. If you want an extra set of eyes, feel free to let us know. We're happy to do that. Few more things because there's a lot of angles to think about at the end of the year. Check class record contracts and special program types for accuracy. And two things with that. So I'll talk about the contract part first. With contracts, We've noticed in other program years where we've looked at data that we will see a labeling convention on a name and in the keyword field for classes at certain agencies that seems to be different than what we would expect that contract to be for that class. For example, we might see a class that clearly says family literacy in the name. It has FL for the keyword, but the contract number is 064. And as most of you know, the contract prefix for family literacy is 054. And we saw that pattern in several places. So that makes us wonder, is this class assigned the correct contract? That can be corrected and fixed in eData. So that's something to double check. Now that most of you are not going to be adding any new classes, you could check existing classes to make sure that they were assigned the correct contract that's consistent with the instruction. And also the same goes for special program type. If the class was a hybrid class, high flex, there's lots of different things. One note on those special program types, there's not an extensive definition of those special program types in the manual glossary. That's actually in the guidelines, the division guidelines. So if you're curious about which to pick, there's a definition of hybrid, high flex, and so on in those guidelines. So you can check there or ask us as always. Also, it's a good practice to add, when appropriate, a reason for leaving to all of those adults that did require an exit date. The reason for leaving field has been added to some queries, and that may help you assess why someone left and what kind of follow-up may be possible with that adult. Also, one quick note, it wasn't in the version 3 items above, but there was a bug with the reason for leaving. Some of the categories like other did not appear in version 2. That bug's been fixed. So when you enter a reason for leaving in eData, it should now appear accurately in the template. So another thing that would hopefully make it easier for you to check to see who you've already marked before you go into eData and make any corrections. And then just situations with shared adult records. This is here just to indicate that shared adults have their own considerations. If you share an adult with another agency, may not be a bad idea if, depending on what their profile, so to speak, looks like in terms of the assessments that have been entered and demographic information that need to be updated. It may not be a bad idea to check in with the other agency, see if that other agency that you're sharing that adult with is still serving the adult. If they aren't, and they have what's called demographic data control, you can have them give you or transfer the demographic data control to your agency. Those might be things to really double check before going into the next program year to make sure that information is up to date, so that if those student records are rolled over, they're ready to go, they're up to date, and they have everything that they need. All right, so we mentioned a little tease earlier with that eligible rollover query that's new. That one thing that is a challenge every single program year, when the system shuts down and you're no longer able to monitor in real time an organized set of who's been assessed because eData is closed, rollover assessments that would be available for the next program year starting July 1st when eData opens, which is going to be down in August. But the date that we'd first start seeing the rollover tests would be July 1st. They're only going to be available, they being the assessments, within 150 days of whatever the adult's start date is for the current program year. So if someone starts July 15th, for example, you'll only be able to trace back 150 days before that to roll over an assessment. If the assessment is older than that or outside of that 150-day window, they will not have a rollover, and you would need to have an assessment within 30 days of their start date for them to be eligible for enrollment next year. So it's always a little bit of a trap going into the early part of the program year with returning and continuing students to potentially miss a test that they are due for. Also, many of you know there's several assessments that are being sunsetted here in a couple of weeks, June 30th. Since those won't be eligible for use in 25-26, you won't see them available for a rollover, even if they are within that 150-day window. And we took those out in that eligible for rollover query. So if you have a Best Plus 2.0, you're not going to see someone in that eligible for rollover query that has just that assessment, because you won't be able to roll over that assessment. So only the eligible assessments for 25-26 will appear in that eligible for rollover query. And what I would suggest for that query is, if it sounds like something that would help you, take a look at it, run it. If you have questions about it, let us know. It's new. But again, if you're not seeing names there, what that's telling you is the person is not going to have a rollover assessment next year. And that last part, the suggestion prompt there, is really just to go through and make lists for who does have rollover assessments or who doesn't. There's different ways of looking at it, whatever works best for your agency. And there is also the possibility of using the keyword field to break those lists of folks down maybe into more manageable chunks and separate the duty of monitoring who has what across different site managers and folks who are doing the assessments. So maybe you get it down to really small lists, and that will increase the odds that you'll catch whoever needs an assessment. All right, that was a lot to go through, but there's always a lot to think about at the end of the program year. So this is where we'll segue into a bit of question and answer, knowing that here in a few moments we will do a template demonstration. So if you're interested in more details on that, stay tuned. But any other questions, we'll just hang tight here for a couple of minutes for a Q&A before we move on.
I have a question.
Yes, Joe.
Hi everyone. It's not Friday, but all of us are here. We have a few near matches where we really just have not been able to get the response to validate if it's the correct person or not. Can I follow up with you on that, or is there a quick
Yes.
answer that I can implement?
Yes. It's difficult to give you a formula to say if you don't have, if you sent us a near match and we said, what's the most recent school attended, or did they ever go by such and such last name or something like that, and you were unable to get connected with the student and get the follow-up response,
Yeah,
it
or they
really
couldn't
just
remember, honestly, the one person.
exactly. Yeah. So if that's a loose end, I would say yes, follow up with a list saying these folks are lingering near matches. We weren't able to get more information. We're honestly going to have to just go in and review those again case by case and see if we can get close enough or figure out a plan B.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. You're welcome.
Hi, Michael. I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Susan, I can. Yes. How are you?
Oh,
This is Becky, but I
Oh, Becky, sorry.
have no worries. I have some students who would have just taken a third post te or progress test at the end of the year. So I'm wondering, would they need a test again to start class in August, or can that just roll over for them? If I'm
If
understanding you correctly, it could.
Yeah, and I want to be careful that I'm not going too far into assessment policy and like how you should post test your adults, but rather to answer your question specifically as it relates to eData, if someone is administered an assessment now in June that is going to be valid for the next program year, so Best Plus 3.0 instead of 2.0, that kind of thing, that assessment will be available for 150 days from, let's say, if it was today, the 11th, that would be available. Just add 150 days, and that's how long you'd have to roll over that assessment into next year. So if that person starts in August, no problem. That would be available. That's only, what, 60 days from now, roughly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, Susan.
I know we
Sorry about
must have
that.
no worries. Must have unmuted at the exact same
Mhm.
time. I just wanted to ask clarification that report the query that you talked about, eligible for
Mhm.
rollover query. Is
Mhm.
that new in the version 3 template?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Are you gonna show how to do that?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, we have been in talks with some of you about ideas for what might be helpful for those assessments, and we've always wanted to be very careful about reducing the number of names that appear in assessment reports too much, because we don't want to filter it down so much that you think, oh, if they're not on this list, they must be good, and we don't have to worry about post testing them. So it's walking that fine line of giving you the information that you need with assessments, which is always tricky, and there's always so much to consider. So we're hoping that this very dedicated, focused report, which is just looking at rollovers alone, is helpful because it's really hopefully timely, honestly, for all of you to use here coming up over the next couple months. But it really is just limited to who will have a rollover. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to post test someone that's not on that list, but you might have to take an extra consideration that you won't have a rollover for those folks. That's really the key.
Okay. Yeah, we track internally,
Hmm.
but it would be nice to have something to kind of compare against. So
Hmm.
thank
Yeah,
you.
backup. Of course,
Yes,
you're welcome.
exactly. Thank you.
While you may be thinking of additional questions, let me make sure that you all have our contact information. Phone and email are equally valid ways to get a hold of us. One thing that's not listed on this screen is that we have increasingly begun using Zoom to connect with all of you. So I know some of you, we've already had Zoom meetings, and it allows us to take a deeper dive into a topic, let you share your screen. That is invaluable to us, to see your screen and have you demonstrate. If it's a technical support issue with the problem, we can just more quickly troubleshoot and we can see what's going on your end. If it's a data evaluation or analysis question, we can more quickly see the process that you're using, maybe add some additional thoughts to that process, maybe even just confirm that what you're doing is going to lead to probably optimal data for you to analyze and make decisions on. So that's something that's not listed here, but is a tool that we've used increasingly over the past 5 years. We've all gotten much more used to connecting via Zoom, and we're finding that it's a really good way to even for 5-10 minutes connect and resolve some issues. So that's also something to keep in mind. All right, so seeing no more questions, what we're going to do is segue into the final part of our webinar. And what we'll note is we're going to do a demonstration, Steve is, on the new features in the template, probably hopefully for you, Susan, to answer some questions that you might have about the new query and the other items that we mentioned earlier. If you're not a user of the template, or if you have other commitments to go to, we are recording this webinar, so you can catch up with us later. But this is what we're going to go into now. And so, Steve, take it away.
All right. Here we have a scrubbed single agency template for version 3. And I'm going to touch on all the things that Michael mentioned were new, starting with the assessments page. Sorry, that was the assignments page, assessments page. Here we go. And the topic we were just discussing was the adults with eligible rollover assessment, which is right here, number 3 on the list. And it's related to the other one right above it, adults most recent assessment date. And I'm going to show that one first, because what this tells you is everyone in your agency had their most recent assessment date for the whole year, the whole program year. So you can see that this is sorted with the most recent date, June 4th, of assessment, all the way down to the ones way last fall. If you go down to the bottom, we see them from May of a year ago, and those were obviously rolled. Some of those were rolled over, possibly. But this is where we came up with the starting idea for the other query, which gives us the adults eligible rollover assessment. So we took this query, adults most recent assessment date, and then we limited it to everything from February 3rd, I think, or 150 days back from July 1st. And so it cuts the number of records for your agency roughly. Well, for this agency, it cut it in half. And so you can look at, in this case, this is also sorted by the most urgent one, because this expiration date is now the most current. And the next coming date is July 6th for this particular for these two students, actually, which is pretty early in July. So if Megan and Alyssa, these are scrub names, if they show up, or if you know they're going to continue, then you're going to need to get on their rollovers as quickly as the eData system comes up and put in their start dates for July 1st, which a lot of rollover continuing students are July 1st anyway. But this just gives you a handle, because you can run this today, you can run it at the end of the year, and then if you save your template, which we've asked you to do, you can continue to run this, send it out to a spreadsheet, print it out, whatever, have it handy, and you can see the students that could potentially have a rollover. In addition to limiting the date range, we also made sure that the instrument names and the version descriptions were legitimate for 25-26. So I eliminated Best Plus 2.0 and some of those other ones that are no longer, will no longer be available in the next program year. So these students have valid tests that could be rolled over in the next program year. And if you have any further questions on that, please sure just contact us and we can talk through how to use it or whatever, if that doesn't make any sense. So if anybody has any questions on that, I can take them right now too. If just open your mic and ask away.
Steve, what I'll add to that, just because it's a little bit of a different way of thinking than many reports, is when you and I were talking about that and designing it, we were thinking, okay, this is going to tell just exactly what you just described. But almost just as importantly, unlike some other reports, the folks that are not on this report might be the ones you're actually quote unquote looking for. And what we mean by that is, if someone's not on this report at all, so there's 407 names for this agency that maybe served 800 folks. If somebody's not on this report, that means they will not have any assessments to roll over in eData when you enter their adult record in 25-26. And that those folks may be the ones that are actually the most important. So we wanted to design it this way so that you had the information about the folks, especially their expiration date and that expiration date 150 days field, so you know what the limit was for availability for the rollovers. But if they're not on this query at all, that really puts that folks on a different list, saying if they begin somewhere in the 25-26 program year, they will only have an assessment if you administer one. There won't be anything available to roll over.
Okay, let's keep going through the assessment page. This is the new and updated button that Michael mentioned earlier for the adults without a post-test and eligible for post-testing. This report gives you a count, but the details button does sort of a double it does more than one thing. It gives you the counts, but then these headers, these two blue headers here, are actually buttons. So if you want to see who is missing any post test, you just click that and you'll get all 45 of those adults listed in another query. So it just gives you the overview and then the details. So it's just a different approach. This is actually a form as opposed to a query, so you can't sort and filter on this page, but when you go to the details, of course, you can sort and filter on all of this, export it to Excel. Also, while I'm in here, I'll note that this actually isn't one of them. I actually added all the fields to. I see I added some of them to here. There are many queries that like here's this is with the most recent assessment date. Many queries now will scroll quite a bit to the right, adding everything from let's see, we got reason for leaving, ethnicity, age, schooling, highest grade, gender, zip code, county, residence type, single parent, low income, homeless, and ex-offender. A lot of extra fields have been added to these queries where I can.
Mhm.
If there's anything that you feel like you could really use in a query, just tell us, and we'll try to get it in there for you.
Yeah, those were the winners from the survey, all those demographic fields you were just showing,
Yeah.
Steve. Those were the top 10, like you said, Steve, where you could pull them in. Those are the ones that you all voted for in that survey.
Yeah. Yes.
Can we make a quick note here, Steve, while
Yeah.
you're on that assessments page?
Yes.
Just because we sometimes get questions about this. You'll note that there's two boxes that have chevrons in them, and that ties back to a key that's at the bottom of this page that says that the formula used to determine whether someone is eligible for a post test, for example, uses that formula listed at the bottom of the screen. So for the broad categories of TABE, BEST, and CASAS, those are the hour ranges that are used to say if someone is an adult that has a pretest with this many hours of accumulated instructional time since taking that test. For TABE, it would be 40 to 60 under ABE, for example. Then if that adult falls within that range, they're going to show up on that eligible for post-test. As I noted earlier, that doesn't take the place of using publisher recommended guidelines and the division's assessment policy to make decisions on who, but it gives you a starting point to say, okay, these folks are coming up by the instructional hours as eligible for a test. And that's where you could start the conversation of evaluating, do they then really fit into whether that is going to be eligible per the guidelines and also by your agency and what you use, because some of you use some higher hourly cutoffs than what's indicated in these items. But just to be aware that those two queries that are labeled with the chevron use that as the formula, so to speak.
Also, with each of the new reports and queries, we've added descriptions. If you just click on the name, if you're wondering what it does, this should help you. And again, you can reach out to us if it isn't helping you enough. I totally get that. We can certainly walk through some finer detail with you for any of these queries if you're in question. So moving on, let me get rid of all of these little windows here. Let's see, we were looking at, there was one on the class group page. The most recent assessment date was moved over here to allow for selection in the up here in the class group key, class group name, keyword selection. So now it's driven by that, as well as there were some modifications to the let's see, it's the adult level change by assessment subtest, had some logic changes as well. Not too many changes on this page. Let's see, on the data checking page, I added adult keyword to the assessment queries. There's several that say assessed, assessment. You can now go in and search by the adult keyword, which was requested and is quite handy. Let's see, on the data validation page, there's a new option for if you leave this contract blank, it'll select all the contracts for the NRS reports with these buttons down below here. That's a new feature. And on the family literacy data checking page, oh yeah, we removed the home visit button, and it's also not in the data check summary report anymore, so you shouldn't see it in there. On the hours page, there was a bug in this enrollment summary report for some of you where it wasn't working, and that is working now. And then added the demographic fields that we mentioned before, like age, county, low income, single parenting, added those to the details reports and the other reports over here where I could put them in. So they just got wider. There's more fields to sort and filter on. Let's see. Then on the monitoring reports page, which this now replaces the miscellaneous page and does everything for the most part that the other one that the miscellaneous page did. And then there's with the understanding that most of these, they don't all say it in it because it got too repetitious. Most of these are counts. Over here, I left the word count, but most of all of these give you counts as opposed to the details, which is the name of the adults. So that's hence the monitoring aspect is more of a numbers, like how many are volunteering hours, or how many are, what things like that. So that's just a general rule for monitoring. It's not a mandatory. On the NRS page, all of the details buttons now have all of the demographic fields. So you can sort by 10 new fields on all of these details buttons, detail reports. And then I added the all contracts selection. So whereas these buttons here are just 064 contract, this includes all 4 contract, not and though.
So if you're an agency that has multiple contracts, so some of you that are parts of bigger agencies, or you're part of a consortium that runs multiple subcontractors or both, you can use those all contract reports 1 through 4B to get an overall profile of everything you have going on. Essentially what it does is it totals up all the data in the template for each of those contracts. If we were to run that with statewide data, for example, you could see a table 1 for all of Pennsylvania, which is actually legitimately how data is reported to the federal government through the NRS tables. That's what they get from us as a state, a summary of the entire state. Do know that if someone participates in multiple contracts, there will be some duplication across those reports. So you will get some duplicates feeding into the numbers, but still it should give you about a ballpark idea of all of the activities across all of your contracts.
Okay, one new report on the outcomes page is right in the middle here. Adult secondary outcomes by agency. It runs exactly like the line above it, adult core outcomes, and you need to select your agency from that line in order to run this line. And it has a details button as well. And on the performance reports page, in the 054 had the most changes, and this is what it looks like. I'll try to make it bigger here. We have some new fields right in a new section called adult assessment, which is based on the adult that is in a family, but it is based on just the adult. They do not have to be in an enrolled family. They just need to be in the program and assigned to a family. So pre-post is an existing field, but it's calculated differently now because the number on the right side is the number of adults that are enrolled in unrelated to whether or not they're in an enrolled family. So this is enrolled adults that are in a family, but maybe not in an enrolled family, compared to what it used to say, which in this case it matches, which is pretty common actually. The P column is the enrolled families, because this section is all about family enrollment, and now this section is all about adults. And then we added ed gains, ed gain percentages, and then no gain post, again, based on enrolled adults. And then I slid over the early childhood T1, T2 over here and put it under child family assessment when I got rid of the, what was it, I forgot.
That's PALS, PPVT,
PALS, yeah.
and
Yeah.
one other one. And what's handy, if you don't have Steve around to help guide you through the performance reports, if you scroll down, Steve, there's always a key which has been updated to reflect everything Steve just said about what those new fields are. And if it's a something out of something and you want to know what the numerator and denominators are, they're explained down here in this key. And this goes for all the performance reports.
Right. Oh, and then on the 6461259, I added a new column called shared adults, which shows the number of adults that could be shared with either a subcontractor or that are shared with either a subcontractor or another agency. So when you're looking at the total numbers here, you just have to take into account that 3 people in this case are also getting counted under another agency somewhere in the performance reports. And that's it. That's everything new. So any questions I can take now, or you can get back to us and let us know if there's anything that doesn't make sense. Pretty quiet group. All right, well.
What we'll do is we'll linger here for a few minutes as you all kind of make your way out. But that is all we have for you today. Like Steve said, feel free to follow up with us with any questions that you have. We'll talk through things. We still have a good month here to go. So just let us know what, if any questions, needs, other things that you have. Have a lovely rest of the week, and we'll talk to many of you very soon.